Hello, ladies. Wow, it has been such a long time since I've done a vlog. Um, but I kind of, have been answering questions here and there for people who have sent me emails or other social media direct messages, etc. I had to do a little bit of TCM, take care of me time. And I was going to come back in September, but I was pleasantly a little busy. But also kind of still feeling out a couple things. We might be changing the way we do the vlog and the format and a couple other things moving forward. So, one of the questions and one of the most profound things that happened this summer, which was probably historic in reference to social media, probably in reference to media, is that we witnessed in real time the execution of someone on our first Facebook Live screen. And that brought about so many thoughts, aside from the things that are going on in politics. But my first thought was about the difference of crime, of course, and how people are treated, and also uh, an experience of shock because everyone was so interested in how the person was able to keep their composure and continue videotaping. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And also just in general, when we have history making incidents in media or in social media. So I was working at WRC NBC. This was in 1992, 93, when I was basically a freshman in college. And there was a gentleman who called the studio, frantic and upset. He said that the police officers, arrested him for no reason. He was beaten up. He spent a night in jail. And he wanted the news team to come out and cover this story. So the story was out in Maryland. I forget what part of Maryland at the time. And I remember we went, and the gentleman was there with his parents. And he would be what we called, and I don't even know that we're using these terms anymore, but back in the 90s, the concept of yuppie was very popular. So he would have been considered a buppy. That was a preppy black urban professional person when we were labeling people. I also would say that he kind of had a look like Jesse Williams, the gentleman that was very outspoken about entertainment. And I don't want to say compare the two that much. I think it's just the eyes and the thinness and certain things that were just similar, just to kind of give you a picture of who we were going to meet. But what wasn't similar to a Jesse Williams is that I later found out that this gentleman had been an intern or a page during the senior Bush administration. And at that time, I don't know what he is today, he considered himself an African American Republican. So that's to kind of give you a picture of the person that we were going to meet, which is a little bit different than the profiles that you see coming up today. So we went to the story, and he was very hyper. His clothes were ripped up. His face was covered in dried up blood to the point that you almost couldn't recognize who he was. And his parents were there. And he said he was coming back from, I believe, an event. Allegedly was pulled over for no reason. And by the time the officers had got to him, he was literally in front of his parents' home. And I guess the parents saw the lights flashing and, obviously were alerted there were police outside. So they came outside and they saw that their son was trying to explain to the police officers that this was his parents' car that he was driving, and apparently he had the appropriate permits and whatever else was involved at that time. And his father, a parent, told or yelled to the officer saying, yes, this is my son, this is my car. The mother, from what I understand, was of course hysterical and what was going on in front of her house, and they wanted some time to go in so they could show the officer their paperwork. And something happened in between that moment, and the gentleman allegedly was slammed on the concrete, and he was like I said, he was a thin gentleman by the police officers. Apparently his head was hit because the blood was still dried. A lot of blood was still dried on the sidewalk, and he wanted to tell his story. Wanted to tell his story to us. One of the issues we had, this was 1992-93, was what could be seen on air. And we had to ask him, could he take the time to go wash off his face? He did not want to do that. He still had all his ripped up clothes. He did not want to get dressed for the interview. And at the time, the station could not. I don't know whether it was FCC regulations or what have you. The way that they did news, maybe because it was an issue that was still in litigation, so to speak. But we were not able to film what he really looked like at that moment, which is very different than Facebook Live. So we did the interview, and we had to put him in a shadow. And we did air the interview, I believe, that day. So that was one thought that came to mind, how different traditional local media had to be on a case like that. Now, obviously, the gentleman was still alive, and the fact that we witnessed this execution allegedly in real time on Facebook Live as you're just waking up. It also reminded me of, I think it was a movie where they were challenging whether or not people would watch people get executed for the death penalty in broadcasting. And I think this movie was in the 90s too. It was like a question. Would people watch it? And I remember it might have been something we were even studying. Like, people were talking about whether or not the American people would watch such a grotesque thing happen to humanity and think it was a show. So this was one of the big conversations of the time, and probably looking back, it was probably also one of the political issues of the time in talking about the death penalty. So it kind of reminded me of our reaction to waking up and seeing in real time a person being killed, and questions to our humanity in that aspect. One of the third things, which is also a reflection on Newsdays. This time I was at WTTG Fox News in Washington, D.C. And we were called on a story in what was Laurel, Maryland at the time. I don't know what Laurel, Maryland is considered right now, but at the time, Laurel, Maryland, or certain areas of Laurel, Maryland, was not considered the best areas, and it took a lot of time for police officers to come out to those areas. So we were actually on another story, and that story was a bust, meaning nothing was happening, people didn't show up, and over the CB at the time, something comes over the CB saying, well, there is a murder in Laurel, Maryland, and we, did our journalistic duty checking with the desk. They hadn't heard. I mean, we were actually, I think, one of the first groups to hear it, and they started gathering. Oh, okay, yeah, we just got it over, the CB, and they were starting to collect information and trying to find the appropriate reporters because it was just production team out there. So we went to the murder scene in Laurel, Maryland, and the cameraman said, Erica, go and find the PIO officer while we set up the microwave truck. PIO officer is the public information officer. It is usually the person who is PR, the person who legally can tell you what's going on and the activities that they're involved in. So, young, on this murder story, and I basically was looking. Now, usually you go up to a murder scene and you're looking for the yellow tape, and I'm looking for the public information officer, and I walk into what was like a garden style apartment building, and I noticed, okay, well, there wasn't anyone in the front, there wasn't anyone up the steps. So I went up to the stairs, and there was a door open, and that happened to be the address of where the murder took place. And I walked in, and there was a man lying on the floor. There was also a man standing over him. And I walked in because I'm like all excited, we're on this story, and I said, hi, I said, I'm with Fox News, and I wanted to know, are you the public information officer? And I remember the person was still just kind of staring at the person lying on the floor. And I said it again. I said, hello, I'm with Fox News. Are you the public information officer? And I will never forget the look on this gentleman's face. It was a look that I have never seen before, and a look of shock, fear, anger, upset. If you could express several emotions in one look, that was it. And I remember for a minute there, I said it again, okay, and what hit me was, who exactly are you? And then I started to think, oh my God, in that split second, is this the killer? And it hit me that I was looking at not a person lying on the floor, but a dead body. At the minute that I started to have those thoughts, a woman walked in who was obviously a family member and started wailing. And it wasn't until that moment that I was starting to process, this is someone's husband, this is someone's father, this is someone's child. That concept of shock when you go into a situation, because you're just kind of going with your daily day, your daily routine, and reacting to the things that had happened. So essentially what had happened, we had gotten to the crime scene before the police did. Because as I said, they didn't come to this part of town very often. Or they didn't come as quickly, I should say. That's misspoke that. They didn't come as quickly to this part of Maryland. So On my way walking down, I'm processing, what had just taken place. And I started to hear some more rustling, and now I see the police officers, and now they're bringing the yellow tape. And um, a reporter, I'm trying to remember if that was our reporter or some other reporter, had finally gotten a scene, and it was a woman. And she was all excited too. She's like, "Where's the murder scene? What's going on? Where's the PIO officer?" Everybody's, all into this story. And I looked at her and I just had expressed to her what I had saw. And I said, "You're so excited about it." And I said, I just, almost, I said the moment when the family member came in, I really had to excuse myself from what was going on. And I said, how do you deal with this? Because she was like, "This is my beat," meaning she did this kind of story every night. Um, and I said, "How do you do this every night?" So the first thing she said was that her father was a police officer, and that she would hear these stories, as a child growing up, to what extent, when daddy came home. And so now she was reporting on the stories, and it was very intriguing to her. But she did say that the way she gets through them is that she has a therapist. And she said, if you're going into news and reporting, you're going to need a therapist. So there you have two kind of scenarios that reflect on, in a different kind of way, what happened that was so horrible this summer, watching a person on Facebook Live be essentially executed, and how the mind perceives shock and things when they're happening. Um, the other thing of reflection in talking about media, social media and traditional media, I remember there was a time when I was at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and we were talking about this new thing called the internet, and what it was doing to news, right? And I think the title was really how to monetize your news source page, because they were just learning how to put up a WashingtonPost.com or an NBC.com, and we didn't have all the cool little ways of monetizing back then. So it was like, well, you got this ad on here, and when does it start to make money? So those were some of the discussions we were having at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. But one of the profound moments was we were talking about when the plane flew into the White House. And I believe this was around 96, 7. Or maybe maybe it was a previous year and we were just discussing it. But the point was that the first pictures of the plane didn't come from broadcast news, didn't come from the newspaper Washington Post. It came, I believe it was Washington Post Online, which today seems normal, but then was like, whoa, what just happened in media? So I think what happened this summer with Facebook Live is another one of those, whoa, what just happened? This has got to be history making. It's got to be studied. So many thoughts came to mind. And then the reaction of the public in Facebook Live was something else and people have suddenly become their own reporters of so many things because the cameras are everywhere on the cell phones. It really still is probably defining itself uh, in media. Um, I'm about to make a hard left turn into another topic here. So back to plus size modeling, and I usually try to look at the tapes before to make sure I'm not repeating certain stories. But I think I'm going to talk about when I became a promotional model for Just My Size Intimate Secrets Apparel, which was a tour, and probably the largest income I received um, in modeling, because we were, on tour for 6 days. It was grueling. 6 days. I mean, 6 days a week, but for 3 months. And we were. I was originally chosen actually to go out to California. And then after the trainings and seminars where they're also kind of testing you on your presentation skills, and this kind of happens to me all the time. Everything I do, all of a sudden I'm singled out in a good way, in a bad way, no. And they're like, no, we're going to switch you because we want to put you where the client's headquarters are. Because apparently I would be representing things very well. So I got switched to the Carolinas because Just My Size was owned by the Sara Lee Corporation. And this is essentially where I started the tour in South Carolina, actually where Forrest Gump was filmed. And that first week was great because we were just kind of relaxing before the tour and going and getting oatmeal, milk, honey, spa treatments, and eating lobster like every day just before the tour. And then you went on a tour, and I was like sick for half of it, but it was an incredible experience. And like I said, we were doing a little bit of modeling, we were doing a little fitting. It really was a marketing tool to get from the public of plus size women what they wanted to see in the intimates apparel. And during this time, I think we were still doing the beige, white, black colors. So I like to say I get credit for helping out with some leopard and flavor in the Intimate Secrets apparel arena. But they went through a lot of transitions after and changes after they found out essentially what the public wanted. So that is another type of modeling in general, but another type of modeling for plus size models, where if you're kind of more interested in the business side and making more consistent dollars, to look into promotional modeling. So the final things that we're going to talk about, which kind of lead into the advice portion. And I want to be very clear and in what I'm about to talk about, because it does kind of, this first time I'm going to really do something that has to kind of do with what's going on politically. But I don't want people to get the wrong interpretation of how it's being presented and who I'm actually for. But I think it is important to tell the story, and especially today with the new happenings with the Donald Trump and women in general, particularly since that is who we are addressing and talking. Shortly after MSNBC, which of course you'll have to read the book about that, I went on a job hunt. And one of the things that I brought to light, I believe, in an earlier tape, is that entertainment and television is somewhat unpredictable. If you don't make your ratings, they're going to change the staff. And the difference, which I think you see more now in every job, which before, people I would speak to in other jobs who've been there for a year, 2 years, 5 years, in television, they would say to you, a month is 3 months, 3 months is 6 months, 6 months is a year is 2 years, 2 years is 5, 5 years is 10. That's how media ran in the 90s. So I'm quite sure now it's a week is a month, in television, basically, because people are constantly in and out of jobs in media because it's so ratings driven. It is an extremely tough field, and you definitely have to have a backbone for it. So one of the things that was interesting was, this was again during the early stages of technology, and I had just gotten this computer, and the computer had broadcast faxing on it. So for you millennials and Gen Z, we used to have to fax our resume, meaning one piece of paper at a time, to a telephone number, and then kind of sit there and wait for the fax to go through and make sure it said okay. And then sometimes it didn't, and then you had to redo the whole process again. So when I got this computer that had broadcast faxing on it, I was like, wow, I can send out as many resumes as I could possibly handle through the computer. So I had went to a seminar where they said, when you're looking for jobs, my early 20s, treat looking for a job as if you are at a job. So I would wake up every morning and get dressed and do my little routine and sit at the computer for literally 8 hours researching and looking for work. So essentially, I remember looking at the queue on the broadcast fax, and I had I think it was like 898 resumes. Let me say that again, like 800 and almost 1,000 resumes, minus 100 or so, out there. So that was a lot of cover letters and work, where I had, done this as serious working on looking for work. So I know there's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of people who have just checked out due to the economy, especially in different Generation X and baby boomer generations. And I think now even more so, we're getting ready to go into another transition, which I'll discuss a little bit more in a minute. But let me continue with the story. So 800, 900 resumes. This is in my 20s. Broadcast faxing. Not like today where you do one little generic resume and it goes out to thousands of places and overseas or whatever. This is something that took a little work, took a little concentration, an 8-hour-a-day project. So out of the 800, 900 resumes, I received a little over 200 responses. And at this time I was in New York City. And this is also how, as a young person, I got to know the city. Although I still wasn't really riding the train, I was using a car. So I became very used to driving in the city with the crazy, to this day, I remember my grandmother saying, "You're driving in New York City with all those crazy cab drivers." Yes, I was driving to these interviews. That was one of the first things that I was learning at that time. And I just remember the experience that I had during that time period was definitely an eye-opener. And it was an experience of tremendous amount of sexism and racism for different interviews. I remember going to, I believe it was Shandwick PR. And this, I was actually being interviewed by a woman. And I walked in, and there were like 3 chairs in this office, and the chair next to the interviewer was broken. And I saw it was broken before getting ready to sit down. And I said to the woman, I think I want to switch that chair if it's okay with the other chair, because it looks like, oh no, sit right there. But the chair, no, nothing's, the chair's fine. Somebody was just here. You sit right there. Okay. So all of a sudden, I became the squat master. I was using every muscle tone because I could see that there was a problem with the chair. And we're from a different generation, so we weren't questioning authority as much. So so then she saw I was kind of like, balancing. She says, just sit down. So sure enough, I got myself to sit down. The chair went down, right? So I'm down, she's now up. I'm like, okay, well, the chair was broken, but okay, I'll just continue with this interview. So this was an interesting interview because every word that came out of this woman's mouth was not about trying to hire you. It was essentially trying not to hire you. How many reasons can we not hire you? Which is probably an interview technique to a certain degree. And I just remember her yelling, not talking to you like a human. She was really just kind of yelling. And this weird little power play of chairs was a demeaning situation to put anyone in. And obviously I was not interested in the company, and they probably found some reason not to call back. Another incident that I had in this 200 interviews was at a company that was a film company, mostly for film in Japan. And I remember the gentleman, I came in to the office, and the receptionist was like, wow, we're so excited to meet you. Your resume is amazing. And I was like, great, I'm really hyped. I'm going to work for this Japanese film company. And she went to go get the person who was interviewing in charge, and he comes out and he says, where's Erica Collins? And the receptionist, she's right there. And he turned and he looked and he said, oh, we have so many people to interview today. There's a line. This will be really quick. And mind you, there was no one in the waiting room. And I just kind of peeked, like maybe I was missing something, but there was no line outside the door. And he proceeded to do the interview in the common receptionist area with like 3 or 4 questions. There was also during this time, and this is what kind of reflects on what's happening today, and I want to be very careful with my words because I am with her. But I was an intern, or I was working on Capitol Hill. The same time that, I don't even want to say her name, but I'm trying to be as politically correct as possible. But at the same time that Monica was at the White House. So when I went during this time period to look for work, one of the things that was to my accreditation that I was so excited to present was the fact that I was a George Washington University graduate, and that I had had all these internships as far as preparation. And back then we didn't get paid for our internships. So I had paid a lot of dues to, so to speak, to uh, get into or apply for certain positions, so to speak, and paying dues as in working hard for them. So during this time period, the experience that I was having in New York was it's like a snicker when I went into interviews during this time, because it was like, oh, so you're a Washington intern. Um, and at 20 some years old, I'm kind of looking at him puzzled, like, why are you winking at me? Okay, like I worked really hard in these positions. And because of the controversy of the time, the Washington intern had gotten this negative um, reputation. And it was affecting, I don't know about anyone else, but it was affecting me when I was going into interviews, that people were blatantly um, making comments about it. And do what you may with the information that I shared. It is not to spark up anything by any means. It's really to look at women and some of the things that happen to women when they go out into the business and work fields, etc. But that was an experience that I was having during this time of searching for work. I was being questioned for someone else's behavior that had nothing to do with me personally. The happy moments. So again, 800, 900 broadcast fax resumes, 200 interviews at the time in New York City. And finally, I ended up in an interview at HBO, which growing up was a brand that we all were so excited about, the little clicky box till you got to HBO. Which is very interesting about my life, because all of the things that I ever wanted to do or grew up excited about, I got to be a part of. And I also got to be a part of very historic moments of those companies and institutions. So I will talk in more detail about my experiences at HBO, but I will say that for the interview process, HBO was one of the few companies at that time that treated you like a human being. Come in. Let's look at your resume. Tell us about your experiences. What's your likes and dislikes? Well, what are you involved in? I mean, it was really trying to investigate where was a possible place that you would fit in their corporation. And it was one of the few. I remember being so tired. And so I don't even, can't really assess the emotions I was going through during that time, but disappointment comes to mind. That by the time I got to HBO, I was like, okay, waiting for the responses that I had gotten from the other 199 places that I went to. I also had a little bit back from HBO. I had a woman who brought me in for Lifetime Television, and she said, I had to bring you in because I'm looking at your resume. And then, mind you, I had a resume, but I also had the recommendations next to it. And she said, I don't think somebody could be lying about this. Like, you worked at Capitol Hill and you worked at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and you went to GW? And I said, yeah. You can call the people and the recommendations and ask your questions. So that was an interesting, and this was a woman's oriented program. So that was an interesting response. But that was the first time in my 20s I was it's me, it's you, it's who you are, it's your accomplishments, your achievements, the things that you've worked hard for. And this was the first time that I realized that someone looking might not believe you, because it didn't occur to me that people lied on their resumes. I was young. It really didn't occur to me that people would lie on their resumes. So, especially that's why I had all the recommendations with it. So back to HBO for the interview process. It was like a real normal interview process. And I'll talk a little bit more about my experiences at HBO, but I think one of the most defining moments is that I ended up working for historically the longest running cable show in the history of cable, which was Inside the NFL. Worked for Boxing After Dark. At the time, they were still doing Wimbledon. And we were obviously right next to Bryant Gumbel and Real Sports. So, in retrospect, a lot of the television programs that I was working for were Emmy award-winning programs. They had professionals that had been there for 20, 30 years. A lot of the, what I like to call regular jobs that I worked for were for CEOs of companies. I was always the right and left hand of a CEO, which was an interesting position to be in, because you were always given the big perspective, the bigger picture. I like to say I was never put in population, which is, there's a certain kind of skill set that you get. So it was always in what was the authority of the project, the corporation, that kind of role, and the communicator for that. So again, 1,000, 800, 1,000 broadcast faxes, 200 interviews, eventually landed at HBO. And the other point to bring out, which I started talking about a little earlier, was that television and entertainment, besides modeling, those kind of fields, do not have a consistent 9 to 5, career tracking at a job for 5 to 10, 25, 30 years, even though those things are changing drastically now. So I had estimated at one point, and I'm quite sure that number has gotten larger, that I have worked for well over 200 companies. Let that sit in your head for 1 second. I have worked for well over 200 companies. One of the things that I was telling the young ladies is that be prepared to have a couple different careers. Now, many of you might not end up with 200 or more companies from ages 20 to 40. But for me, I was temping at one point. I was doing freelance work, and I was doing consulting as my skill set rose. So I was working in companies such as Bear Stearns before the banks were too big to fail. And I remember going into Bear Stearns, and I remember having a real problem with the door, because the door was made out of marble and this very expensive brass. And I just remember the building itself, the desks, the chairs. I mean, wealth was just oozing from this company. I've worked for companies like Young and Rubicam. I had a stint at Goldman and Sachs during the time that they were announcing things about Home Depot and American Eagle. It was American Eagle, and it was Whole Foods or one of the other companies that was in their portfolio. So I have intook and it was great for news because I had all these diverse experiences and all these different companies, and I was fortunate enough to be, right next to the CEOs, the high level executives, um, little old me, and was able to intellectually process what was going on, and that was helpful. That was very helpful when you're doing a news story about banking, or you're doing a news story about business. And obviously, I also worked for the United States Chamber of Commerce, which was another kind of perspective on business. But I say all that to say that over 200 jobs, over 800 resumes, over 200 interviews, and I'm only talking about a certain point in my life. I haven't actually done the total calculations. My advice: don't give up. Sometimes it's more important to have the experience. I am by far what I like to call an experience junkie to a certain point, but I'm very much into the experience of things. Probably at an age now where I want to pay a little bit more attention to the monetary aspect, but the experience will always be with you. The monetary aspect will come, go, you'll need more, you'll be driven to do things based on just that. And when you lose it, you won't know how to react. But if you really engulf the experience, you will be able to draw from those experiences new opportunities, even when there seems like there aren't any. So definitely embrace the new experiences that you will have, and don't give up. So I hope that you enjoyed the first vlog of the season. We are back. We will be doing things differently in the coming vlogs. And I will be making some other kinds of announcements there. And then I don't have any major announcements right now. Same things are still going on. You can still see me on the same platforms, same social media. And hope you have the best week, month. Until next time.